and now with Congressman Steve Womack from Northwest Arkansas. Thank you, Congressman. Appreciate you being here.
Good morning and welcome to Washington.
It's nice. It's beautiful weather here.
Beautiful.
And we're also joined with an old friend of Arkansas, Ron Fournier, formerly of Arkansas AP and Arkansas Democrat, now with National Journal. Ron, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
Glad you're still with us here. Congressman Womack, you've been really front and center on the Marketplace Fairness Act, which is, in a nutshell, it's placing internet tax for people that purchase goods on the internet.
Well, actually, the Marketplace Fairness Act is nothing more than enabling legislation out of the federal government that pushes the decisions back to the states. And I'm a huge 10th Amendment guy, and as a former mayor, I just believe the federal government needs to stay out of a lot of the issues that directly affect our states. And look, I agree with Senator Alexander from Tennessee. I don't think that the states ought to be going mother may I every time they want to do something. The federal government has some opportunity to stop it dead in its tracks. But the fact is, the playing field, the retail playing field, Alice, today is anything but level. As an example, you can go into a store today anywhere in Arkansas on Main Street, and when you transact a purchase of an item, they're going to collect and then remit back to the state the sales and taxes that would be that are applicable to that particular political subdivision. But you can buy that same item online, and because of the nexus rule from the Supreme Court decision in '92, they don't have to collect it. Now, it's still owed, but the onus is now on you as a consumer to download the proper information from DF&A and then remit the taxes back to the state so they can be distributed to the political subdivisions. Nowhere is that fair. That's not free market enterprise. So I just think that what we need to do is give this issue back to the states and let the states have the authority to compel these online retailers to collect and remit just like the Main Street merchants do.
Because what you've seen and what many who support this, brick-and-mortar stores have become nothing more than showrooms. People go and take a look and smell and scratch and touch the item, and then they go back home and purchase it over the internet.
Well, and because of that, these brick-and-mortar stores aren't going to be around much longer.
Right.
And as we said in the green room, so to speak, that we might as well admit that absent any federal involvement in this issue, we've just exempted a whole lot of things that we buy from sales taxes, because the more people understand that they can do this online and not have to pay those taxes, the more they're going to do that, and there's going to be a tremendous amount of lost revenue, and people are going to start screaming at the local level about how they're going to be able to afford basic services like police and fire protection and streets and bridges and drainage and those kinds of things. So, look, I think it's important to be fixed. Now, let me just say this. I totally get it when people say, look, I don't want to have to pay those taxes. I don't want to have to pay those taxes. I would prefer that our tax structure be lowered. And quite frankly, I'm a believer that if the state governments if we pass this and the state governments were able to enforce those collection procedures, then I believe that those states would have the capacity to reduce the overall tax burden to its general population, while at the same time saving Main Street merchants.
Right, and you're certainly keeping an eye on a lot of money matters up here. You had a meeting with the subcommittee of the financial services with Secretary Lew, and it got pretty heated.
It did. In my line of questioning, and I only had 5 minutes, I wanted to focus on what I believe is the single greatest domestic threat affecting our country today, and that's this growing debt. We're at nearly $17 trillion in debt. That is an unfathomable number. People can't wrap their head around $17 trillion. But in the president's budget just submitted, it goes significantly higher, and the net interest on that, just to service the debt, not to pay it, but to service the debt, now well over $200 billion a year, goes to $750 billion a year in the next 10 years, which is just around the corner. So I really wanted to know from Secretary Lew if he considered that to be serious, affecting this country. I just don't think this administration truly appreciates how significant the $17 trillion debt is, and the general public out here totally understands what $220 or $225 billion just to pay the interest is, and what $750 billion will be in 10 short years. And I heard your previous segment. Look, the only way to really have any guarantee in this city is to enshrine it in the Constitution. That's why I believe in a balanced budget amendment. I just think that until you put it in the Constitution, like Arkansas and its revenue stabilization, if you don't have a balanced budget provision in the Constitution, there's no way you'll ever get 535 people in Washington, D.C. to ever agree to have the kind of fiscal jurisprudence that would be required to save our country as we know it.
We've got just a little over a minute left. Ron, what are your thoughts on that? Does the government understand the magnitude of the financial crisis we're in?
I think they do, but they're being pushed by political forces that are forcing them to publicly ignore it. It's interesting what you just said, that you don't think without a constitutional amendment that we can get this done. What has changed since the mid-'90s when a Republican-controlled House and a Democratic president did come together and find ways to not only balance the budget but to create a surplus?
Both sides got away from what I believe is the sound fiscal policy. The Bush administration spent more than it took in, and it has just accelerated exponentially. I mean, we've added, $5-6 trillion to the debt under this particular president's watch, and there's no end in sight. And when you submit a budget, when the leader of the free world submits a budget that does not address sufficiently the issues of deficit and debt, then I think you've got a void in leadership. So I just think it's about leadership, and then we have trained, we've not done a very good job of managing the public's expectations of what government, the federal government, should be. We spend lots of money. We have waste, fraud, and abuse. We have all kinds of federal outlays. We have duplicative programs. We have just gotten upside down with our spending. Look, I believe in what Paul Ryan said early on. We have a spending-driven debt crisis. It's not that we tax too little. There's no amount of taxes can fix this problem. It is the fact that we have to address spending. And if we fail to address spending, and 2/3 of it is on the mandatory side of the pie, 2/3 of it. We have gotten sufficiently low 2 straight years cutting spending on the discretionary side, but we have failed to address what's really the major drivers of the deficit and the debt, particularly healthcare spending, but on that mandatory side.
And you had mentioned the failure of leadership. We've had the President Obama in the past said, if we ever have to address raising the debt limit, then that shows a failure of leadership. And here, that's what we've had to do.
Void in leadership. I mean, you can trace everything back to decisions that are coming out of the executive branch of government, including the current sequestration, which was his idea.
Right. We do have two forms of leadership here. We have the executive branch, and we have the House of Representatives, which has the paycheck, is run by Republicans. To get a compromise, both sides have to give. If the President of the United States is willing to cut entitlements, something that Democrats like to demagogue you on, but he's willing to cut them, to take that issue off the table for you, can you see any way where Republicans would be willing to give some more tax revenue to give him cover?
Okay. Just like you talked about with immigration. If you don't solve for the border problem, nothing else you do will work, because you still got a hole in the fence. You're still going to encourage more of the same. So it begins with one thing. It begins with, like the 12-step program for people that have addictions. You have to acknowledge the problem. And we believe that the problem is not that we tax too little, it's the fact that we're spending too much. So we want the other side to agree that this is a problem. If we can get to that, then I think there is a way for both sides to be able to meet a little closer to the middle on the eventual solution.
Well, let's hope everyone can come together, have bipartisan cooperation, more than anything, certainly on the immigration, but especially the budgetary matters. Congressman Steve Womack, thank you so much for coming in. We appreciate you.
Enjoy your stay here.
Thank you. I will. It will be a great weekend. The weather is nice. And Ron Fournier, so great to catch up with you and hear your stories, and look forward to having you back on soon.
Thanks for having me. Anytime.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone. Appreciate you listening today. We'll be back Monday morning on the Alice Stewart Show from 6 to 8 on 96.5.